Good day, fellow citizens, and welcome to the first, what I hope to be a continuous conversation, our maiden voyage, so to speak, in search of, fearlessly in search, relentlessly in search of truth among the sea of lies and disinformation currently being promulgated by what used to be called the mainstream media. First things first, why are we here? Why are you here? Why am I doing this, and why are you watching? There are several reasons. Foremost among those, I'm a patriot. I'm a patriot. I love the Constitution. I love our country. I love the people of this country, of every race, color, and creed, of every religion or every lack thereof. I love the values on which our country was founded. Was it perfect at its inception? Absolutely not. Is it perfect today? Absolutely not. As human beings, we will never achieve perfection. We are, by our very nature, fallible. Therefore, it's a work in progress, a continuous work in progress. To use a cliche, it's the journey, not so much the destination. The final destination that awaits us all, that's a topic for another day. However, this country has given more freedom and more opportunity to more people than any country in the history of the world. Therefore, I believe it's our duty as citizens to protect those values, to not see them systematically eroded in a way in which I see them happening now. Second, the corporate mainstream media has failed in their primary mandate to hold those in power, particularly government, to account without fear or favor. Any objective, rational observer who's paid even cursory attention during this past election cycle and continuing to this day, which happens to be New Year's Eve 2016. Happy New Year's, everybody. Cannot with a straight face tell me that we're not being lied to on an hourly basis. I don't know about you, but I don't particularly like being lied to, and I presume you don't either. The mainstream media no longer questions those in power, whether they're multinational corporations who pay their salaries via advertising, or government officials to which their relationship has become so incestuous it is hard to distinguish where the White House press office starts and the corporate media ends. We will be, on this show, relentlessly challenging the prevailing narratives endlessly regurgitated by the mainstream media, CNN, CBS, NBC, Fox, whomever, and whatever your political affiliation may be. Your search for truth should be the ultimate goal. During our time together, we will cover many topics of contemporary and historical significance. Things you may not think affect you, things that you don't think about in your daily life. But I can guarantee, I can assure you that if you do not start paying attention to some of these crucial topics, in some cases actively resisting this barrage of lies, it may ultimately be too late to do so. I hope to discuss with you on a daily or semi-daily basis, depending upon the reception from the internet, things that you will not hear discussed on your nightly news. Things Lester Holt and Brian Williams and Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, Lawrence O'Donnell, Don Lemon, CNN, the rest of them. Things they will not talk about. We will discuss them here. and we will be honest with you. A few introductory issues, recurring themes that you will be discussed on during our time together. Number one, has anyone else noticed that since 9/11 there have been essentially unending wars, both in the Middle East, North Africa, and elsewhere? Wars that you hear about and wars that you don't hear about. We had declared war after 9/11, and in my opinion, rightfully so. However, we fought the wrong thing. We declared war against a tactic, terrorism. Those familiar with warfare will know that in war there are two things. You have your tactics and you have your strategy, or your ultimate goal. What are you trying to accomplish by employing those tactics? The idea that we can fight a tactic such as terrorism while not simply glossing over, but not even mentioning what the ultimate goal is, whether out of political correctness or fear or obfuscation, whatever the reason is, we as a country, as a society, we who believe in classical liberal Western values, we who believe in women's equality, rights for gay people, rights for everybody, for everyone, with those of us who want everyone to be treated equally, to have equal opportunity, not necessarily equality of outcome, but equality of opportunity, have a responsibility to ensure that, at least in this country, the United States of America, that doesn't just become some fanciful tale of how things used to be, passed down from grandfather to grandson. It's our responsibility, it's your responsibility to safeguard these rights, these inalienable rights that were provided to us. Regarding terrorism and the unending wars under both Democrat and Republican administrations, there are a few key questions to ask. Number one, cui bono? And those of you who do not speak Latin, means who benefits? Why, under Barack Obama, under George W. Bush, the foreign policy of this country has remained relatively constant. Obama has sanctioned more drone attacks, including the extrajudicial murder of American citizens abroad without a fair trial. Now, no one weeps for terrorists, in this case Anwar al-Awlaki. No one weeps for them. But it's important to note that if the government can simply declare you a terrorist and then kill you without trial and you're an American citizen, then what's to stop the next administration, say a President Trump, someone you may not agree with philosophically or politically, from declaring you a terrorist for your speech? And that therein lies the rub. I'll give you a small hint before we get too far into it. President Eisenhower warned us about this in his farewell address. YouTube is an excellent resource of a plethora of information, various topics from all different sides. And I suggest you use that resource as both a historical guide and as an educational tool. One of my New Year's resolutions for 2017 is to learn more about everything. Recently, I've become a vacuum, sucking up all kinds of information from various points of view. and I profoundly enjoy it, and I hope you do too. I hope our little time together provides you a little insight into both historical and contemporary issues and what it means to you in your daily life and what it means to the lives and the future of your children and grandchildren. Because after all, the generations before us passed along to us a country that we could be proud of. Is it perfect? No. Have there been aberrations committed by both parties? Absolutely. But all in all, it's our responsibility. It's your responsibility to pass on that which has been bled for and died for by generations before us. It's our responsibility to now safeguard those inalienable rights. Secondly, the terms du jour, one that you hear all over the place, terms that were not part of the common vernacular or parlance until recently. These terms now appear in the New York Times and the Drudge Report, from Salon to InfoWars. They are globalism and the New World Order. I think it's helpful before we dive too deep into the specifics of what these are to at least set the parameters of the discussion. It's important. Language is important. Definitions are important. So who are these globalists? Is this a real thing? Or is this tinfoil hat, paranoia, conspiracy theories? One of my favorite terms. Gore Vidal once said that he's not a conspiracy theorist, he's a conspiracy analyst. And anyone who's ever opened a history book knows that history is replete with conspiracies. When someone calls you a conspiracy theorist, they're trying to shut down your ability to think for yourself, to question the status quo, to question what they're telling you. The CIA weaponized this term in a memo during the 60s, right after the JFK assassination, and said to essentially to prevent, I'll paraphrase the memo, to prevent any questioning of the official narrative vis-a-vis the Warren Commission report. Anyone who questions this, we will call them members of the Grassy Knoll Society or conspiracy theorists. They will be labeled as borderline insane. If you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald probably couldn't have made that shot with a Mannlicher Carcano single-shot bolt-action rifle from that book depository. If you don't believe in the magic bullet theory as promulgated, as officially described, then you are a member of the Grassy Knoll Society. What it really means is the term, and their new term, fake news, the real agenda behind using these terms is to shut down debate and to shut down discussion. They don't want you, the government and those in power, whether multinational corporations or the President of the United States, does not want you to think critically. One thing that has been sorely lacking in our society is the ability to think critically, to look at facts and look at evidence and draw a conclusion. To not simply believe what you are told at face value, particularly from those with a history, a marvelous history of lies, obfuscation, and other nefarious things. But we will get into that in due time. So, globalism. to get back onto my point, globalism, what are they? Do these people exist? What do they want? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is this some sort of plan for global government or planetary rule? Do they want a bunch of automatons dumbed down with fluoride in the water and chemtrails? Is this a real thing? Is this a real movement? And if it is, how do we resist it? How can I recognize it? Who's a globalist? Where did they come from? How long have they been doing this? Did this just pop up 2 years ago? I submit the answer to those things are no. And I further submit to you that they are quite public about their plans. Not public in the sense that you'll see a commercial for it between the Viagra commercial and the commercial recommending that you get a vaccination for pneumococcal pneumonia. It's not that kind of open. They'll put it in journals and white papers and books that only they read, because they know that the public, the general public, the majority of the public, is more interested in what Kim Kardashian and Kanye West's relationship is, or what is going to happen to Brangelina, than they are about uncovering and learning about these, in my opinion, nefarious, very nefarious, anti-human almost goals. But again, we will get into that in more detail in further discussions. Third, the federal government, with a collaborator bought and paid for corporatist media. There is a relentless assault on that pesky little thing, that thing that has kept tyrants, would-be tyrants, those with tyrannical tendencies, in check since our founding. The Bill of Rights, specifically the First Amendment, is under overt assault as we speak. The internet was developed in the late 60s by DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency or whatever, out in UCLA, California, essentially by the Pentagon. It has changed the landscape of communication, whether peer-to-peer, things that we're doing right now, but it is also, and I think most disturbingly to those in power, provided a alternative narrative. See, when there are only 3 channels on television, you can control what the public hears, and you can therefore control what the public thinks. And the most dangerous thing to those in power is a informed citizenry. But we'll get into that in further detail. Moving right along. Fake news kind of dovetails into our last subject. The term conspiracy theory no longer works because all those conspiracy theories, like maybe Hillary Clinton's health isn't so pristine. Maybe something's wrong. Maybe there's something she's not telling us. No, that can't be right. That can't be right. Then in one of the most ultimate, I don't want to say beautiful, but it was quite ironic. that on 9/11, the anniversary of both the um, terrorist attacks on the United States of America in 2001, and also the assault on the diplomatic consulate / CIA base in Benghazi, Libya in 2012, she proceeds to, essentially, she would have collapsed had she not had handlers around there, and she stumbled and fell and lost her shoe. This is not normal behavior for a healthy person. All these conspiracy theories kept coming true, so they had to come up with a new term. Very simple, very straightforward. Fake news was the new narrative. These are, this is again a way to shut down debate. If they can label anybody who questions the official narrative coming from the government and vis-a-vis the mainstream media, we can just label you fake news. Now, despite pay no attention to the New York Times or the Washington Post or people like Judith Miller, who used to work at the New York Times, that was a mouthpiece for the Bush administration leading up to the Iraq War. Remember all those stories about yellow cake from Nigeria, or aluminum tubes, or mobile biological weapons labs? Remember all those stories? They all came out of the New York Times. Yes, the paper of record. The old gray lady. Now, it gives me no pleasure to witness the real-time collapse of institutions such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, all these different institutions, which I would say for the majority of their time have provided a service to the American public. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case. If you want real news, if you want to cut through the spin, the hype, and the propaganda, you go to places like the Drudge Report. You go to RT. You go to InfoWars. You listen to Alex Jones or Paul Joseph Watson, or any of these other truth seekers. Are they always right? Absolutely not. Are they always perfect? Absolutely not. But it's important to not just swallow everything that Lester Holt tells you on the evening news. Another topic we're going to cover, and not in this episode, but in episodes to come, is Islam. What is Islam? 20 years ago, were people really concerned about the Islamification of Europe, or was the term Islamophobia even a thing? Did you know what jihad was? Did you know what Islamicism was? Did you know what Islam was? Are these all the same things? Is jihad a violent struggle against the infidel? Or is it an internal spiritual struggle against oneself and one's basest desires? It's important to know the difference between Islam, Islamicism, jihadism, before I get the angry comments that not all Muslims are terrorists. Of course that is not. Of course that is true. Not all Muslims are violent terrorists. But we will here stick to the facts. As uncomfortable as they may be, we will cite the Islamic State's own words. What is their goal? Terrorism is clearly their tactic, but what is their strategy? We can look at examples from 9/11, and that's certainly not the first terrorist attack, but just for contemporary and for time's sake, because to list them all would be quite an endeavor. But we'll start September 11th, 2001. You can move on to Paris massacres, San Bernardino, Orlando, Brussels, most recently in Berlin, where a refugee who had been arrested in Italy served 4 years for aggravated arson, or whatever they call it in Italy. Served 4 years in an Italian prison, subsequently released and allowed to travel freely, apparently, through the European Union, for which there are no longer any borders, into Germany, and proceeded to mow down families celebrating the Christmas holiday. Killed 12 people and injured dozens more. A despicable act, a terrible criminal who is now deceased, and I presume not with 72 virgins. I presume he's somewhere quite a bit hotter. But again, religion, we'll get into that too, but for another time. So we're going to not just look at the individual atrocities committed by these self-proclaimed jihadists. We'll certainly touch on those as an example, as a touchstone, to further understand their strategy. Is the Islamic State, are they to be believed when they say that they are trying to establish a worldwide Islamic theocracy, also known as a caliphate? And that in order to do that, they are going to follow the example of their prophet Muhammad, who, let's just say, employed many of the tactics that ISIS is currently employing. Sex slavery, murder, beheadings, crucifixions. These were not taboo for the prophet. These were, in fact, if you read the Hadith, which is essentially a recounting of the lives and times and deeds of Muhammad and the sayings, you'll see quite clearly that ISIS is not deviating from what Muhammad did 1,500 years ago or so. In fact, I defy anyone to point to something that ISIS is doing and say, well, Muhammad would not approve of that, or Muhammad didn't specifically do that. Unfortunately, Islam has become, and Islamists have become, a terrestrial political movement masquerading as a religion. Are there good Muslims out there? Absolutely. The people are not the problem. The doctrine is the problem. It's going to be a difficult subject, but we are going to get into it, and we are going to be honest with you about it. We are not going to shut down your opinion, and if you can point out in the comment section where I'm wrong, I'd be happy to read them and to respond to them. There's nothing I'd like more than to be proven wrong on some of my my facts and conclusions, because that means I'm learning something, and we should be never be afraid to have our opinions, our facts, or what we think are facts, or our conclusions challenged. That is the essence. That is the core of intellectual advancement and learning. Moving along. Social justice warriors. What in the world is going on college campuses these days? What type of people, what type of humans are they churning out? Are they giving degrees to and basket weaving gender studies and all these things, where they think the most pressing issue in the world, particularly in the United States, not the world, but the most pressing issue in this country is racism and misogyny and Islamophobia. Do these things exist? Yes, of course they do. It's tribalism. Human beings, biologically and by nature, are essentially very tribal creatures. Um, this is the United States is really the first grand experiment of a multicultural, diverse society, and I believe that can obviously be a positive thing. The more culture, the more people you bring in with different viewpoints and different perspectives on life, certainly the better. But one thing I personally am tired of, and I presume that you are too, is that we are tired of being called racists, misogynists, homophobes, xenophobes, Islamophobes, being put in that basket of deplorables that Hillary Clinton so eloquently um, contributed to the lexicon of the United States during a fundraiser hosted by, I believe, Barbara Streisand in New York City, where she and her elitist friends proceeded to essentially designate those who supported Donald Trump, probably the most imperfect person I have ever in modern political, quite possibly in the entire history of our country. One thing you will not hear on this channel is a blind defense of Donald Trump. We will be honest. When he's right, we'll tell you he's right. When he's wrong, we will point out that he's wrong. However, his general theme of Americanism, not globalism, that's his credo. If he really follows through on that, then the excruciating minutia doesn't really matter. There is a systematic attack on the sovereignty of the majority of the West. People like George Soros and his Open Society Foundation, who want to essentially dissolve national sovereignty and borders, and they've already done that in the European Union. It's essentially a borderless country. And what's the genesis of this? Did it start with people like Zbigniew Brzezinski? Does it go back further than that to the Fabian Socialists and the Rockefellers? People like Harry Truman, who set up the League of Nations. And what is their goal? Why are they setting up these multilateral, unaccountable, unelected, undemocratic bureaucracies? Why do they love them so? What's their purpose? They must have a purpose for this. I personally believe in national sovereignty. You know, that quaint, arcane notion that countries should have borders. You know, that thing that, tens of millions died for during the Second World War. Those things are important, and I believe that simply handing over our right of self-determination to unelected bureaucracies is one of the main reasons you see the rise of national populism, from Brexit to the election of Donald Trump to what just happened in Italy a couple days ago, to Marie Le Pen in France, to Angela Merkel's problems in Germany. People like their country and their culture, and they're willing to defend it with their lives. Something that there are voluminous examples of throughout history. Finally, we will go with the daily issues of the day. The what seems to be on a loop these days is the Russian hacking story. Now, those of you who believe that we would have read headlines like Russia hacked the election if there were a president-elect Hillary Clinton, I have a bridge across the river in Brooklyn to sell you. It is simply not the case. Just since 2012, foreign governments or state-sponsored individual hackers or groups have penetrated the White House, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Department of State, the CIA director's personal email, and not a whisper do I recall, and I pay pretty close attention, from the Obama administration. Now, all of a sudden, since John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's former campaign chairman, fell for a Gmail phishing scam, well, loosely attributed via secret, unconfirmed CIA assessments leaked to the mouthpiece of the establishment, the Washington Post. And once something gets into the bloodstream via the Washington Post, it is repeated ad nauseum on the nightly news, the New York Times, and every local paper, AP, Reuters, you name it. Nobody, very few, people like Glenn Greenwald and Mike Tracy, Alex Jones, Paul Joseph Watson, these people are, Matt Taibbi at Rolling Stone had an excellent piece the other day, simply questioning that conclusion. We're not saying, and I'm not certainly saying, that I'm not open-minded to believe, when I put it past Putin and the Russians to hack into the DNC and John Podesta's emails. Absolutely not. I would like, however, before we start saber-rattling with a nuclear power who has more ICBMs than we do, pointed in our direction, I would like to see a modicum of evidence. Glenn Greenwald in The Intercept had a great piece the other day where he quoted William Bennett, former technical director for the NSA, saying that the National Security Agency could essentially trace the IP address of these of the origination of these hacks. So what is going on here? The mainstream media is saying, what, you don't believe 17 intelligent? How dare you question 17, the conclusions, the high confidence assessment of 17 of our intelligence agencies. How dare you? You must be a Russian agent. Everybody now is a Russian agent, a Putin stooge, a traitor. They're throwing around words like treason from otherwise, I presume, reasonable, thoughtful people. But the mainstream media, the print and TV media, has so completely lost their mind over the election of Donald Trump that they have turned the rhetoric up to 11. And the problem with starting at 11 before Trump is even inaugurated is that you really have nowhere else to go. I've never seen anything like this. Now, granted, I don't, being in my 30s, I don't have a great personal historical experience, but I certainly have read enough and know enough about history to know that this is not normal. This is not normal behavior. Clinton and the Democrats were so convinced that they were going to win this election. Newsweek was printing out. Hopefully, you all seen the Newsweek November 9th or 10th edition, whatever it was. Madam President. They were so convinced. Huffington Post gave them a 98% chance of winning. They were so convinced up until about 9 o'clock p.m. on an election night that they were going to win. And then something happened that the media, the Democrats, could not have seen coming, or should have seen coming, didn't see coming, and to this day cannot accept. They have quite literally lost their minds. They have gone around the bend. Hopefully they come back, because it's important to have, I'd like to see more than two, but it's important to have at least two rational parties, one opposing the other. It's important for a democracy, for a constitutional republic. I hate when people call it a democracy. We live in a constitutional republic. If you don't know what that is, a constitutional representative republic, please feel free to look it up. I will explain it to you. But it is not a democracy. It is not a mob rule. This is what the Electoral College is for. This is why you don't vote on the National Defense Authorization Act, or why you personally didn't get a vote in Obamacare legislation, because we elect representatives to vote on our behalf, to act as a proxy for the will of the people. Hopefully. Certainly not all the time, but hopefully the majority of the time that's what they do. And that's how our system's set up. And that's why the Electoral College exists. So 51% of the people can't vote to enslave the other 49%. See how important that is? We'll get into that at a later date. There's so much to get into. Getting back into the Russian hacking for 1 second, or the alleged Russian hacking. There's so many contradicting. And if you read the language of these statements, they don't come out and say at 8:30 a.m. on March 13th, 2015, Alexander Vinchenko logged onto his computer, broke into the Democratic National Committee, extracted these files, and then leaked them to DC Leaks, or handed them off to WikiLeaks or to Julian Assange. You don't see that. All you see is that the hacks happened in a manner that is consistent with previous hacks that we also think may have been done by the GRU or the FSB on Putin's behalf. And the idea that what they're trying to do, let me tell you what they're trying to do with all these different narratives, from the recount to racism to riots in the streets to Russian hacking. The goal is to delegitimize the incoming administration of Donald Trump. Plain and simple. None of this would have happened if Hillary Clinton was elected, which is why you didn't see any of these things brought up. Well, you saw it brought up by them, but you didn't see the hair on fire hysteria that's currently being expressed throughout the Obama administration. Unfortunately, someone who I had great hopes for. The Obama administration, but that's when I was young and naive. The Obama administration and their willing accomplices and collaborators in the mainstream media. The headlines read, Obama responds for election hacking. Election tampering attributed to Russia. Now, if you just read the headline and you didn't read the whole story like 75 or 80% of the citizenry does, you would think that Vladimir Putin personally went from Wisconsin to Michigan to Pennsylvania to Ohio, stopped over in North Carolina, and then proceeded to go to Florida and tampered with the vote count When I hear election hacking or election interference, that's what that's the message they're trying to convey. That's the propaganda they're trying to. That's the insinuation. They're trying to delegitimize President-elect Trump before he even takes the oath of office. I see it as a terrible political maneuver, and so does the country. I think the last poll I saw on this, 30% of the people believed that the alleged hacking, the alleged election hacking by Vladimir Putin changed the outcome of the election, which even the most wild-eyed conspiracy theorists like Kurt Eichenwald from Newsweek, Joy Reid from MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, etc., etc. You could go down the list. Even they, I don't think, would make that claim that that Russia altered the vote count in states. However, that seems to be their. That seems to be the opposition now. The election of Donald Trump was a defining moment in this country's history. He is certainly an imperfect person. Do I wish he was more articulate? Yes. Do I think he's out to get me? Do I think he's out to get the American people? No. Do I think he's a racist? No. Do I think he's a homophobe? No. Do I think he's, until he ran for president, Jesse Jackson was giving him awards from the Rainbow Coalition, and he was meeting with Al Sharpton, and, none of this. None of this. He's promoted more women at his company, blah, blah, blah. I'm not here to defend Donald Trump. I'm here to hopefully have a conversation, you and I, have a conversation and come to an understanding about what's really going on in this world. There are larger forces at play. And if we fall into this left-right false paradigm trap, then the elitists and the globalists will get exactly what they want. It's very easy to rob people blind when the peasants are fighting with each other. So it's our responsibility not to let them get away with that and not to let that happen. And what I believe the first step in that process is to become informed, to become aware, to start thinking critically, to start questioning things, to not just take what you hear on the nightly news as gospel. These things are critical in the preservation of our liberty and the preservation of our society, our culture, and our country. I welcome you. My name is Declan Mulqueen. Not quite sure what I'm going to call this yet. I would love to hear some suggestions. Please comment below. Please let me know what you think. This being our maiden voyage together, we may have had a little trouble shipping off. Hopefully I didn't stutter, or hopefully this was somewhat coherent, and hopefully you got the gist of who I am, what I care about, and how I think you and I together can make a difference in the world. We are living through historical times. The old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Well, it doesn't get any more interesting in this. Perhaps it's time to put down the video games and the virtual reality, because reality is happening all around us, and it is much more interesting than any simulation thought up by somebody else. We are living in historical times, and I believe it's our responsibility as citizens, as patriots, as Americans, to ensure that we pass on the liberty, the birthright, what we were given by our fathers and our forefathers. It is our responsibility now to pass that along to our children and grandchildren. This is essential. This is the goal: to pierce through the propaganda, to resist tyranny, to make sure that truth is being spoken. And in the end, truth, my friends, truth will out. Always. Always will. So I welcome you. I hope you enjoy yourselves. Any things that you'd like me to talk about, or anything that you think I said that you either agree with or disagree with, please comment below. I would love to hear from you. And again, if you have any names for this, any good names, what we can call our little, what we can call our time together, not the Mulqueen Report or the Declan's Daily Diary or anything corny or stupid like that. Something nice would be, Anyway, I will certainly take your opinion and I will attribute it to you on air. I will not just steal it and claim it as my own. I will give you your proper credit, your proper due. And until next time, my friends, stay safe, stay awake, and stay aware. Oh, also, if we have a good ending line, I don't know. I'll have to think about it. You think about it too, though. We'll come up with something good together. I'm sure of it. I have faith in us. I have faith in humanity. I have faith in our people. So God bless. Until next time. This is Declan Mulqueen, signing off.